Thanks for joining Just Us Chatting. I'm Tamara.
And I'm Michael, and if you're interested in the things that we're talking about, you can follow us on Twitter at Just Us Chatting, or you can check out our Facebook page, Just Us Chatting. Please go ahead and like and subscribe our channel. We're trying to put out our conversations just about every day. We missed one or two here and there. We take Sundays off, stuff like this, but we just want to be engaged with the conversations that we find interesting going, that are happening in the world, and so we wanted to share that with everyone because I think that personally, I think that the way to moderation is through conversation. I think that we've got to be able to have talks between reasonable people, real people, that aren't dedicated to a political ideology, to kind of moderate some. I think we live in an era with the internet where it's up to us to moderate the extremism in the world and kind of help to moderate the cultural discourse. So, I guess that just came off the top of my head, but I think that's what I'm interested in doing here. And so if you're interested in that kind of stuff too, and you want to jump on board with us and talk about these things, like and follow us on social media. And we actually got our, one of our first responses today was from a video that we did a while back, or a few days ago, last week sometime, on a Medium article that was written by Mark Ledwich, and he responded to us on Twitter and said that he enjoyed it, and he agreed with what I was saying about harmfulness being given a new meaning rather than becoming meaningless. And Mark says, but I think most people using it like this aren't being Machiavellian about it. They actually do see harm through the lens of identity, group, power dynamics. And I agree with that. I think that's true. So hi, Mark, if you're watching. I appreciate your feedback. I agree. I think that people, they do see harm, and they really feel like there is actual harm there. And so it's, I agree. I think that they do. I think that they definitely do see harm there, but I still think they're trying to steal a word. They're trying to. I guess what I really think about that is that they're trying to sleight of hand all of their assumptions about cause and effect into the word, and so they're trying to negate any debate about correlation, causation, or the effects of certain kinds of discourse on society, and they're just saying that you can't say things because it harms people, and that's I won't accept that, and I won't accept that turn of events. I guess I should say I don't think that's a good turn of events. We need to have we can't hide all of that, all of those assumptions about cause and effect within the term harm, and then just pretend that there's no debate to be had.
Right. So
that's my real problem with it. I understand that and they may be right that there are harms being, that there is harm being caused. I'm not saying that they're wrong necessarily, but but I think they're probably wrong in some instances, and that's where the problem comes in. Is that there's probably some good reason to believe that some discourse does cause harm, and there's probably good reason to believe that other discourse doesn't cause harm. And when you just say that this, that there are harms being caused, or when you say discursive harm, these kinds of things kind of obfuscate an entire realm of debate about the cause and effect of narratives and discourse. So I think that's kind of an underhanded sleight of hand that they're using to hide or negate that discussion and that debate. So,
and there's a difference between causing harm and someone just being offended.
Right.
I have no,
Right, and that's the other thing. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, you were saying something. I cut you off.
No, it's just, it's not my responsibility to, like, for your feelings. I'm not responsible for someone else's feelings.
Amen,
like
sister.
I can do my best to be kind and compassionate, but you know, we also need to have certain discussions, and certain discussions are controversial
Right.
and can be a little tricky to navigate, but it's not my responsibility to make sure that people aren't offended.
Well, and this is one of the reasons that I think Jordan Peterson so disproportionately and strangely popular in the modern world. He's actually talking about responsibility, and we don't like to think about the fact that we're responsible for our feelings,
For our own feelings,
right? Like, but if I'm offended, that's because I took offense. It's not because somebody, was doing something to me, and that's a hard lesson to learn.
Right.
That's a matter of maturity.
Yeah,
You know
and
what I mean?
sometimes the other person is meaning to be offensive or intending to be, hurt you or whatever, but it still is your responsibility to decide how you're going to take something.
Right, how you're going to react to it.
So.
And so that gets into, I mean, there's, the, whether you want to call it spiritual or psychological, the kind of ability to step back from your own identity.
Yeah.
Right, which is one of the reasons I think identity politics is so harmful, to our
culture,
our progress. Really,
Yeah.
it's the in order to really be, I think, to be fully mature as a human, you have to be able to step back from your identity and not be fully connected to your identity.
Yeah.
You have to be fluid about what your identity means and what it is and whether or not it's, good, so that you can change and, you can fix ways of being.
Upgrade.
So you can upgrade yourself.
Yeah.
You have to step back and
and realize that those things are not who you are truly. Right. They're not.
Right.
They're separate. I mean, they're thoughts that you have, they're feelings you have, they're beliefs you have, but they're not completely representative of me as a person,
right.
as a human being.
Right. And so, the autonomous individual that kind of resides behind the identity, or the collections of identities, if you want to. I tend to think of identity as a collection of Post-it notes kind of stuck on the, outside of a clear mannequin that you're looking out from, and so, like, you've got, like, little Post-it notes for, like, for
your likes and dislikes.
For likes and dislikes. I'm a good person because of this, and, I'm too much of that, and I'm, but at least I'm not like those people, and it's all these different little Post-it notes that you stick on yourself to kind of, cover up the nakedness of the fact that you're, like, radically empty of substance, what I mean, as spirit in a way, like, there's no content. You're a process, you're life, you know what I mean? And so the fact that there's, and so all of these identity things that come in, and we kind of glom onto, like, they're habits, they're, things that we're used to, but in any case, I think a mature human being has to be able to, like, step away from their identity, look at it objectively, modify it and change it. And so I think this, kind of deep attachment to identity is a regress, kind of regressive culturally.
And I think that's why we're having these conversations, and I think that's what you and I have been doing for the last decade or longer. And we're just trying to upgrade our belief system a little bit and see where we're right and see where we're wrong and see where culture could upgrade itself. But maybe we should get to one of the things that we were watching earlier.
Yeah, we could jump into those.
Because we were getting a little metaphysical there.
Yeah, that's okay. I also wanted to get into, like, something else that you said, and what I kind of titled this live stream was Fundamentals and Transcendence, and there was something that you had said that triggered a direct correlation to that, and
this morning?
Yeah, just now. I can't remember what it was, but maybe we'll get to it.
Okay.
My thought was that we could talk a little bit about, well, maybe I can start with a little bit about fundamentals and transcendence in terms of something that I've seen a lot in the discourse. I wanted to look at the Jordan Peterson talk with James Lindsey and Peter Boghossian and Helen Pluckrose that he posted this morning.
Yeah.
Joe Rogan and Jonathan Haidt were, on the Joe Rogan podcast recently, and that was a very interesting talk a couple days ago. But one of the things, and so maybe in the context of those things, but one of the things that I was kind of interested in talking about was the kind of what people in the integral community know of as the pre-trans fallacy, but as I've been kind of wanting to talk about it, I've recognized that takes on a, like, pre-trans could take a really weird connotational turn in the or like misunderstanding of it in the modern kind of cultural dialect, right?
Because of all the trans.
Right, because there's all sorts of trans issues going on, right? And so you think, well, what is?
But you're talking about a different. You're talking about like.
So I'm gonna kind of rephrase it in a little bit what I feel is maybe more apropos, but maybe a little like more clunky. But it's a pre-post fallacy. We'll say pre-post, right?
Okay.
So the concept being that something along the lines of, well, it's dependent on the recognition of a developmental framework. Okay, so you have to have the recognition that things, especially humans and human systems, develop over time through stages of kind of development. And so, and they're kind of predictable and repeatable. So you get things like pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. And you could say that pre-conventional is a child, and a child maybe hits people hits other kids because it wants toys and stuff like this, and eventually we learn to use our words, and we kind of identify with our group, and we become conventional, and we want to make sure that we fit in and that everyone likes us. And then possibly we move to post-conventional, where we're not satisfied with just everyone likes us. We want to actually kind of bend the rules and maybe break them in certain ways so that we can, right wrongs. We can develop a new higher moral kind of standard that we hope will become conventional. So this is, very kind of general, but it's a good framework. And then there are times if you've got someone in the conventional mode who sees somebody doing something post-conventional, they're breaking the rules, and they're going to say that person is pre-conventional.
Right. Even
though, like, okay, so Thoreau not paying his taxes, or Martin Luther King, at sit-ins at deli counters, and these kinds of things, civil disobedience, Gandhi. There are people who are, conventional in those societies, in that context, who looked at that and went, that person's just a lawbreaker, right? But the truth is that they were highlighting, they were breaking the law to highlight the injustice of the law,
right? Which
is a post-conventional attitude, and it serves to create a new social paradigm that is a higher morality. It's that it opens conversations and allows us to generate a new social paradigm in which we can coexist in a new,
healthy,
higher order.
Sure.
Right. So you got to. It's a. Right. But if you're looking at that from a conventional space and you see that, you go, well, that person's breaking a law or breaking a rule, which is a convention, and they immediately say that's pre-conventional. They go, that's a bad person. Right. Not everybody does that, but a lot of people do, and so that's what's called what I'm calling a pre-post fallacy. Like it's a confusion of the post-conventional and the pre-conventional.
Right.
So that happens a lot in these conversations. I think there's a lot of confusion around that because and for good reason. One of them is that we've got really, really talented and intelligent people, professors who are very smart, and they've spent a lot of time and energy, investigating the things that they're investigating. And then we've got student activists who are taking really advanced technologies and being stupid. So, you know...
They haven't even made it to conventional.
Right.
They haven't even developed a conventional way of being.
Right. And so you get that's something that's happening a lot in the culture right now. Or at least it's something that we see in the culture wars. It's always in the news, like, you know, this thing happened on campus and these people are crazy. So there's just based on that fact that you've got, you know, kids who, well,
young adults, barely,
who really, they just don't know much. I mean, if I look back at myself as, you know, in my early 20s, and it was, you know, I was more confident than I've ever been, that I knew everything I needed to know. And like, I was dumber. It was just dumb.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there's no way no other way to put it. I was you know, woefully ignorant and full of myself. It was narcissistic. It was just.
It's a pretty common phase for for people to go through.
Yeah,
you know?
and I think that our childhoods are extending as our society becomes more, kind of, I would say, less demanding.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Very much so.
So when I'm saying, you know, it's like I'm torn between calling, you know, people in their early 20s kids or young adults. You know what I mean? Whereas if you think about like the early 1900s, you know, you start calling people young adults in their teens, in their early teens, and it's like, you know, young lady to someone who's like 12 or 13, and it's like they meant it. They meant that this was a young lady. Like she's going through puberty, so she's becoming an adult.
A lot of people were married by the time they were 18, 17,
yeah, well,
18
I mean, and
years
if
old.
you get back far enough, they were marrying it like
even younger, of course,
much younger. Yeah. So it's you know, there's progression of the extension of childhood. I'm getting off in the weeds, but
yeah, it's okay.
The idea is that I do feel like, because of, you know, all of those factors, the extension of childhood, the fact that, well, that leads us into a situation where, because the developmental processes are elongated, I think there's something good about that, because it creates a richness of experience. Like, the longer you get to experience childhood, the more, you could say, the more full your experience of childhood is, in a way, right? Because you get to, well, I think there's something valuable to that. I don't know what we're going to see come of that. This is just speculation on my part, but there's also the fact that these kids aren't fully developed in their worldviews yet. They haven't come to appreciate conventional modes of being, and they're being taught how to deconstruct conventional modes of being, so they never get to conventional modes of being, and they become, you know, narcissistic little monsters.
Because they're being taught that it's bad, and so why would you become conventional if you think that it's not a good way to be? Right.
So if you're getting cut off at the knees before you get there, it becomes a problem. So anyway, these kind of pre-conventional kids with their post-conventional mental technologies create a lot of discourse that is like tangled up by this pre-post fallacy. So that's something I wanted to kind of tease out and talk about a little bit, and that's why I titled it this way. Maybe we can return to that theme in a little bit, but this morning we watched Jordan Peterson's posted a new video this morning where he did a online interview with the grievance studies hoaxers, and we talked about this, I think, a little bit ago. We talked about Peter Boghossian being in disciplinary trouble with his university. So for anyone who doesn't know what's going on there, well, I'll just go ahead and I'm gonna put up a clip of you know, them. They're gonna kind of I'm gonna let them lay out what they were talking about. Jordan Peterson asks James Lindsey about what about the hoax papers that they did, and why they did it. And I'm gonna just kind of let them talk for a few minutes. So let me put them up on screen, and we'll see if I can get. Let me see, not full screen. Let's go to theater mode. Make this a little bigger, and we'll switch to the browser. All right. Let's see if I can. Maybe I shouldn't switch to theater mode because then more of that's in the screen. Let's go back. Default. There. Now we're not totally in their face. All right. I'm gonna let this play, and you guys just check this out for just a couple minutes.
It's a career-ending charge, so that's partly why it's being brought against you, right? Data fabrication. There isn't anything worse. Well, there isn't anything worse within the domain of science than you could do than that.
So okay, yeah. Peter Boghossian's been accused of data fabrication, and it's kind of ridiculous why, and we're about to hear a little bit about it.
Yeah, and it's really unfortunate and preposterous because the data fabrication occurred intentionally in the sense that we wanted to find out if they could detect, because we suspected from the very beginning, as we were kind of discussing earlier, that these people who largely work in the humanities are not equipped to do social science, but that's ultimately what they're basically doing. And so we wanted to see if they could detect utterly ridiculous data, or data that were clearly cherry-picked, or data, or conclusions, I should say, that were drawn from data that aren't warranted. And so we wrote papers that included, in this case, for example, the dog park paper, just transparently ridiculous data. And in fact, the first draft of that paper, even, we knew the data were so bad that they were probably going to ask to see it. And we thought that's the end of the road.
So that's James Lindsey, kind of discussing why they did fabricate data. It was intentional, and it wasn't. But the charge of data fabrication requires that, like their project requires that at some point they come out and say, look, this was all fabricated. Like the whole point was to fabricate it.
Right.
So the fact that Peter Boghossian is being kind of investigated and charged with his, by his university for fabricating the
data,
as if he was trying to actually get this stuff to be recognized as credible, for the furthering of his career or something.
Right.
It's insane. So, well, I'll let them go on.
Go through the papers then. So we'll talk about the dog park paper. Why don't you go through the papers that have been published just briefly and say what they are, and tell us why they're transparently ridiculous, because that's also a bone of contention, right? Because
the dog park paper was the first one we had accepted in February, and it chronicles. It's a feminist scholar, putatively, that's chronicling dog rape culture by examining dog humping in Portland dog parks, and then draws conclusions from that using black feminist criminology as a tool to conclude that it would be appropriate to train men as we train dogs, if only it were politically feasible, so we have to come up with metaphorical equivalents, and that it concludes that oppression of dogs based on perceived gender is real, and the reason that was allegedly concluded was we claimed that humans intervened and broke up gay dog rape much more frequently and vigorously than they broke up straight dog rape. And it's already a bit weird. What's the data
of these things?
So that was Helen Pluckrose laughing. She's of the three, she's the resident literature scholar. So she's got more kind of experience with the deconstructionist and critical frameworks than the other two. She helped them actually make these papers more presentable, but yeah. So just a little bit more about what they actually did to get these papers published.
The paper included, for instance, the detail that the scholar sat in the dog park for 1,000 hours over the course of a year, but never in a heavy rain, and observed and then personally closely examined the genitals of just short of 10,000 dogs, which if you've been to a dog park, you probably realize the same people bring their dogs almost every day. There's not 10,000 dogs in any dog park in a year, but never mind that.
Someone like to develop a reputation
for looking at dogs' genitals? Yeah, I think so. And then immediately turning to ask their owners, excuse me, sir, could you tell me your sexual orientation? That's what the paper says. We interrogated genitals of 10,000 dogs, genitals of 10,000 dogs, and then interrogated their owners as to their sexual orientations.
Of the
It includes
dogs.
details
The
that
sexual
are
orientation.
like
Oh, of the
use
owner?
the bathroom on other dogs or in the food bowl. The water bowl, it talked about, the way people would break up dog fights, like doing jumping jacks and singing. We thought this data was so absurd that we put in the first draft, which the journal saw, a line that said that we took the data and put it in a recycle bin so that they couldn't possibly ask us to produce it, because we thought, oh man, if they ask for this data, which is so stupid, it's over. So we said that we recycled the data, which is already its own research mispractice, and no problem. The journal was like, oh, just write it up.
Okay, I can't believe we're having this conversation.
Listen, the more we talk about this, the more ridiculous it gets.
Okay, so let's go on to another paper. That's just...
So that was one of the 4 papers that they put together 20 papers. They had a few of them rejected, 7 accepted, and 4 actually published by recognized journals in the respective fields. That one was a peer-reviewed feminist journal that published that paper. It got through peer review, and it was yeah, I mean.
And it was like applauded, right? Like
It won an award.
Yeah.
It was awarded for exceptional scholarship.
Yeah.
That's, I mean.
It's asinine.
It's asinine. It's insane that this is happening. And so what for those of you who don't know, the crux of what they're attempting to do here is not just let's be mean to gender studies people. This is a group. I'll take Peterson at his word. He's a classical British liberal, and the 3 people who are involved in these studies were left-leaning liberals. They call themselves left-leaning liberals, and they say that their whole purpose in this is to kind of help point out so that there can be correction,
right? Because
they believe that there may be important things to know about sexual dynamics in the workplace, sexual dynamics in our culture, and that this kind of study is not contributing to knowledge in a legitimate way,
right?
And the fact that they have an entire canon of literature, right? On when you talk about scientific literature, you're talking about peer-reviewed papers with reproducible results, where you could go and do the experiment again. You'd probably get the same results.
Right.
That's just not the case when you talk about the literature in gender studies or the literature in race studies.
Right.
It's autoethnography, and it's this kind of stuff.
It's opinion.
It's
opinion based.
And it's ideologically driven opinion.
Yeah.
So it's
not unbiased in the slightest.
Not even a little bit. And so their whole project is not, like I said, just to be mean to gender studies people, but to kind of you have to point out that the emperor has no clothes. You know what I mean?
Right.
Before you can go, oh, okay, well maybe we should redress this problem.
Right.
You have to make people aware that there is a problem.
Yeah.
Right? And you can't just be, some crank on the outside going, well, this stuff's stupid. Because it's very easy for them to say, oh yeah, sure. Like, look, all this literature that everyone's done, it's all stupid, right? Sure. You're just stupid. You don't know because you're not on the inside.
Right.
You don't understand. It's very easy to just dismiss outsiders.
Yeah.
And so they had to go ahead and show that this stuff can get into their literature, and that the really important part about this to understand is that these papers, and Helen talks about this. If you want to watch this whole video, it's really fascinating. Towards a little further towards the end of the video, Helen talks about how all of this research, quote unquote, that they did was supported by works that already exist. So they were citing other papers in the field to make their to make their conclusions, to validate these points, right? And so that was the real project, was to point out the fact that we were able to say this ridiculous thing because there's already a whole canon of literature that exists that supports anything you want it to, as long as it has a specific ideological kind of direction.
Yeah.
Right? And so everything that they've got, there's you can check out her Helen's the editor at, what is her? She's, man, I can't remember the name of her place. She's got an online, she's got a blog. I don't know if I want to call it just a blog. It's actually very interesting.
Is she a professor at?
No, she's not actually a professor. She's a master. She has a master's degree, and she was worried that she wasn't going to be able to go on and develop her and develop herself as an academic because of this whole thing. But I found out today that someone in Germany has decided that to kind of provide her with a doctorate course.
Nice.
So that's good. There it is. Arrow Magazine, that's what it is. Arreo.
R-A-R-E-O.
Arreo Magazine. So Helen Pluckrose is the author, editor of Arreo Magazine. And she's done a really good job of outlining some of this silliness. Maybe I'll get the link to their comprehensive overview. But yeah, she like I said earlier, she really helped them kind of make these papers, because she has more of a background in literature and in feminist literature. Her master's is on I think something like women in medieval in medieval Christian literature and the ways that women used the kind of the discourses of the time in the Middle Ages to assert their own power, and to kind of use the patriarchy and assert their power through that. So she's got a lot of experience with it. Anyway, the point is she talks about how all of the points that they made, were backed up by their references, and so they put all of these papers and all of their references online in Google Doc, and I'll link to that too. I think in the description, maybe once we're done, I'll find that and put a link to that in the description too if you want to look through it. So it's a very interesting situation. Peter Boghossian's the only one who's still the only one of the three who's because Helen's going on for her doctorate. But Peter Boghossian is facing
threats.
Well,
for one.
Yeah, that's true. We didn't even talk about that. He lives in I think he lives in Portland.
I think.
So he lives in a very, very progressive SJW area. And he's been accosted in public by people who have told him, individuals and groups of people. There was an individual who followed him around in a bar, followed him into the bathroom and was telling him he was, a horrible person and stuff like this, and you kept trying to tell him that he wanted to, like let's just sit down, we can talk. What do you know? What's your issue with me or whatever?
And the guy didn't want to talk.
The guy didn't want to talk. He said, I don't want to talk to you. I want to hurt you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like he's been genuinely harassed and intimidated by individuals and groups of people on the street in public. Since this came out. So
does he work in the university though? I'm
yes,
trying to remember what his role is because I've heard him speak.
He's a professor.
Okay.
And
I mean, he's like hosted a number of these events talking to various intellectuals.
He's been involved in that, but he's been involved in a few speaking engagements and things like this. But primarily, he's an atheist, and he's worried that the kind of new cultural sphere on the left, that the SJW, whatever it is, that it looks like religion in a way, and that they're making unfalsifiable claims, and that there's a certain kind of zealotry, and that there's a certain kind of evangelical
fervor.
Yeah, fervor and kind of nature to the project, and so. Yeah, so he's kind of. So
he's outspoken about his beliefs, and a lot of people are not liking it.
Yeah.
But.
Well, and you could say, well, maybe he's being, just hyperbolic and ridiculous, and that maybe it's not that big of a deal. But that's why I wanted to bring up this little piece that I want to share with you from a recent talk between Joe Rogan and Jonathan Haidt, who wrote the Coddling of the American Mind, which I have yet to read, to my shame.
Yeah, I know. I need to get that.
But he wrote the Coddling of the American Mind with a man, Jonathan Haidt, and Greg Lukianoff, I think is his co-author's name. So Joe and Jonathan were talking, and I'm just going to let this play for a second. This is probably a shorter thing, 2-3 minutes maybe. And it'll let you know kind of the extent to which these ideas are infecting not just culture, but systems. And, in our video the other day when we talked about integral theory a little bit, we talked about making an important distinction between culture and systems of enforcement. When you've got cultural enforcement, it's like, it's people shaming you and stuff like this. When it's actually put into, systems of enforcement where people are going to lose their job, or there's disciplinary actions of some sort, and there's a system to convene tribunals about your ethics. We're getting into things that are much harder to change. It's calcifying, right? And so I think that calcification is dangerous in a society that's in such rapid flux. Mm-hmm. We need to be able to be fluid. Yeah. Especially at this point in our technological advancement and social progress, that we're seeing this massive melting pot of people, and then the absolute democratization of ideas, and people can talk to each other all over the world. We've got just this incredible new mode of being, and we don't know what to do with it yet. And clamping down and trying to get back to some old way of being, or clamping down in favor of some new radical way of being. Either of those kinds of clamping down are, I think, disastrously wrong at this point. We need more kind of freedom so that we've got flexibility and we can adjust accordingly. Yeah. So let me play a little bit of Jonathan Haidt here talking about what it's like to be a professor at an American university.
be right back while you play that.
Sure.
When you're teaching classes and a subject comes up that may be controversial, do you have like this overwhelming feeling that you're treading on dangerous ground?
Yes. Yeah. So I taught Psych 101 at the University of Virginia, and I would take them into sex differences, the origin of sexual orientation. I would even do race differences, and because there was a reasonable person standard, and I trusted my students and they trusted me. And we had a great time, and we covered a lot of stuff. But now, then I moved to New York University in 2011. When my previous book, The Righteous Mind, came out. It's not about UVA versus NYU. It's just about the changing time. Now, as I said, I have to teach to the most sensitive students. So I teach a course on business ethics and professional responsibility. We have a section on discrimination and employment law. It's important to cover. We have to cover it. MBA students have to know where the lines are, what the law is. And yeah, I'm kind of scared when I teach that because I'd like to get into all sorts of things. I'd like to get into what do numerical disparities mean? If there's a gender difference in the percentage of tech, but not in the percentage of non-tech employees in Silicon Valley, what does that mean? I would like to talk about that. But if a single student thinks that I am denying the existence of sexism, they could be offended by that. And in every bathroom at NYU, there's a sign telling them how to report me anonymously. And they put these up in 2016 in response to student requests. And it means that all professors are on notice, that they can be reported anonymously at any moment.
By children.
Well, these are, I'm not going to call them children. I mean, my students are MBA students. But the
like I was saying a few minutes ago, it's just this weird definition of when can we stop, when should we stop calling people children? He doesn't want to call his own students children. They're master's level students. Fine, understandable, but
undergrads, 17 to 21-year-olds for the undergrads. Yes, that's right.
Barely not children anymore.
That's right.
And there's an incentive to this what we're talking about before. This incentive that gives them attention, they get prestige, they get value from it, and this culture encourages these things.
That's right. And this is a terrible lesson to teach them. So, the subtitle of our book is called The Coddling the American Mind, How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. And so these microaggression reporting systems, that's basically what it is. A microaggression reporting system, it has a good intention behind it. There are cases of professors who make ethnic jokes. Okay, they should stop doing that. I mean, maybe that was okay 30 years ago. There are legitimate complaints, and faculty there should be some accountability, some responsibility. So there's a good intention behind it, but it's usually based on no empirical evidence, and because it's based on pressure applied to a bureaucracy, not by a committee thinking, how can we improve the climate for everyone? No, it's like, we make these demands, we demand 10 things, and the administration says, okay, we'll give you 5 of them. There's not thought put into what would happen if we give the students an East German-style anonymous reporting system, and so everybody's on notice that they can be reported at any point. What might happen to the social dynamics? Like, nobody thought that through.
Yeah.
So, that's he makes a very important point there, and it's, it speaks to a lot of the concerns that I think are valid but overblown on the right, with the idea of this kind of authoritarian, this kind of cultural authoritarian thing. Mm-hmm. It seems like, for the most part in the West, we've done a pretty good job of just bashing the hell out of cultural authoritarianism in any way that's remotely Christian. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
if it's Christian cultural authoritarianism, we pretty much beat the hell out of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Judeo-Christian cultural authoritarianism is like, it's
not really in the society, like,
it depends on where you are.
Way.
I mean,
yeah.
you can find it in small towns, across America, I'm sure. I'm not saying that there aren't you know, little pockets of it here and there. But like our culture, right, is our shared sense of meaning. It's not that. You know, broadly speaking, America is not that way. And we still feel incredibly comfortable just like, you know, laughing. Ha 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 ha. Stupid, silly, you know, people that believe that, you know, the world's only 6,000 years old. Ha 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 ha.
Yeah.
Right? It's totally acceptable and prevalent all across, you know, media to just
bash
slather these people with, you know, disparaging, you know, ridicule.
Yeah.
There's no, you know, so this kind of cultural authoritarianism, you know, that is on the right, it's perfectly acceptable. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be, you know, don't make fun of, you know, Christian people or whatever. I'm not saying that. But what I am noticing is that it's incredibly that our acceptance of this kind of ridicule of cultural authoritarianism is limited to a specific culture. Right? Like, so any other culture that you want to try and ridicule poke fun at or even critique carefully.
Yeah, even discuss.
Right. You get
like whether or not they might be doing something wrong.
Right.
Like even to discuss Muslim culture
right.
and the way they treat their women. Oh my gosh.
Right.
It's
and
horrible.
you think and it's the kind of thing where you would think that feminists would be, you know,
up in
outraged.
arms. Yeah.
There was a woman recently who was fleeing her family.
In Saudi Arabia.
She was fleeing Saudi Arabia, and she was in Bangkok, and she was trying to get to Australia to claim asylum.
Yeah, to start a new life.
Because she thought her family was going to kill her.
Well, yeah, and like I wouldn't... You know, I'd be in the same position if I were her. I mean, they like locked her up for 6 months. They kept her in her room for cutting her hair.
Yeah, that's right. She wasn't allowed out of her room for 6 months because she cut her hair.
Yeah.
And so, and you know, the possibility that if she was sent back to, and originally, you know, Saudi Arabia was trying to get her extradited and deported from, and I'm sure they still are.
Yeah.
But the possibility that she would be imprisoned for trying to travel without a male guardian for, you know, a number of years, and then upon getting out of prison, the possibility
of her being executed,
the realistic possibility that her family she would become the victim of an honor killing at the hands of her own family is extremely high. Like that's very realistic.
Yeah. And that people, like,
that's
are
terrible.
not outraged. I mean, there are people that are outraged by it, but the people that are so far...
But I think it's insane to say that we can't talk about that without, like to say that because there is Islamophobia, because Islamophobia exists, right? And I would say an unreasonable fear and, you know, kind of otherizing and exclusion of Muslim people is real. I think that happens, and that there's reality to that.
But we can't discuss what in our minds they're doing right or wrong, and like we can't even discuss
because
way that they're living.
This is the weird thing about it. It's like, because there are bad ideas about, you know, about Muslims and people who think too simplistically about groups of people, right? Because there are stereotypes, we're not allowed to discuss real problems.
Right.
That's not good, because we can't dissect the stereotypes, and we can't. Here's another thing: is that, like, there's a lot of, you know, stereotypes out there that are stupid and totally unreasonable, but there's also, like, stereotypes that are, well, okay, and it depends on what you want to call a stereotype, because you could say that, like, you know, people have 10 fingers and 10 toes is a stereotype because not all people have 10 fingers and 10 toes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
it's kind of...
But it is the vast majority
right.
of people.
And so there's stereotypes that are unreasonable, and there are stereotypes that are harmful, and there are stereotypes, but there are stereotypes that are based in reality and that are harmful. Right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, if you want to say, okay, well, it's a stereotype of Muslims to say that, you know, that they don't treat their women well. It's like, well, okay, that's a stereotype. But it's not like that stereotype isn't based in reality. Now, it doesn't mean that you should treat individuals based on, you know, on your assumptions,
right,
or based on some sort of, you know, broad, stereotypical kind of imprint. But we use stereotypes. We simplify things to the point where they need to be in order to kind of exist in the world and to just move forward. If we didn't have a way of simplifying categories, just naturally we simplify categories. It's why we have polarization, political polarization. It's like, oh, okay, I don't have, you know, there's bad people over there. Whatever.
Right.
It simplifies things. If we didn't do that, we couldn't move forward in the world. We couldn't talk about anything. We gotta like categorize things but to have these conversations, we have to be able to have these conversations, because it's when we're in a situation where we can't talk about when we're in a situation where we can talk about the ways in which women are treated unfairly under Western patriarchy, but if you mention the way that women are treated unfairly in some other context, you know, and try to compare and contrast that, you're considered a bigot.
Right.
Then we've got to, like, we can't have, you know, and I guess there's a case to be made that it's just not our place to have that conversation, right? That we aren't, you know, it's not our culture and it's none of our business, you know?
Yeah, but
they're
humans. I mean, like, you know, I feel for them. I feel for these women. They may be from a completely different culture, and some of them may be entirely okay with the way things are there, but I'm sure a lot of them are not. And we need to be able to discuss these things. Like, I'm sure a lot of the women that are treated horribly over there kind of hope that someone might eventually intervene somehow.
Yeah, I've heard some you know, Iranian feminists who, you know, decided to uncover. Yeah. You know, who, I mean, incredibly brave. Yeah. Incredibly brave.
No kidding.
Like, it makes me want to cry.
Yeah.
God, it makes me want to cry.
Was that the one that was facing like a year or two in prison for unveiling her head, and there was video of it. Yeah. I mean.
So, it's just, you know, and we live in an increasingly, the world that we live in is you know, constantly shrinking because of technology.
Right.
Like, it used to be that, you know, you couldn't get from one side of the globe to the other. Now you can do it in, you know, a day.
Right.
So, you know, as technology increases, the world becomes smaller. Right. More and more people are interacting, and now with the internet, virtually interacting, right?
Yeah.
If not in person, certainly, you know, we have the capability of exchanging ideas.
Yeah.
You know, across borders and across cultures ad infinitum. No problems.
Right.
Right? So, you know, if we're going to live together, this is the thing about cultural cohesion. We need context that we can all agree upon. I think a fundamental context that we all need to be able to agree upon, as kind of you know, look at in terms of spiral dynamics and integral theory, the ideas of the rational enlightenment or the principles, that came out of the rational enlightenment, the principles of individual sovereignty, individual liberty, and the value of each individual as somehow innate and divine in a way, right? Like, that doesn't mean that everyone's the same on the outside, that everyone has the same amount of stuff, or that everyone's going to be, have the same aptitudes. It's not that.
Yeah.
But there's something ineffable about each individual human being that is valuable and of equal value to any other human.
Right.
It's like something approximating the idea that, we're all the children of God. Right? This kind of idea.
Yeah.
That's the first kind of universalist level of worldview development.
Yeah.
And I think that for a global society, we all need to get there. We all, like, the whole globe needs to get to that level of, kind of worldview development for us to have a chance of living together without killing each other.
Right. And, I mean, it doesn't mean that you have to agree with, another culture's way of being or their belief system. You can have different beliefs and still have compassion and believe that they have rights and that they, like you said, like a child of God, that kind of idea, I don't know what it would be if you were an atheist, but, just the idea that, like, we all have value as human beings. Our ideas may not be the same, and, some ideas are certainly better than others. I will say it. I'll say it. There are certain ideas that are better than others.
Well, that's the other thing that's dangerous about the kind of promulgation of this kind of relative, the postmodern relativism. That this kind of radical egalitarianism. It's like, again, I guess kind of going back to that idea of the fundamental versus the transcendent. The fact that we're like, there's two different kinds of, equality that we end up talking about in these conversations. One of them is a fundamental equality, right? Which is fundamentally, we're all human. Right? Then there's this kind of like, the transcendence is necessarily not the transcendent ideals are kind of almost definitively not universal, because the foundation is universal. Like, we all have, like, every human being has a physical body. That's like everyone does, but not every human being is Gandhi. Right? So as we kind of individuate and specialize in different ways, the transcendent aspects of our being become more and more refined and more individual, and eventually that which is transcendent about us is unique to us specifically, and it is not fundamental to everyone, right? So the transcendent being is, you could say that being which, you could say that the being which has the ability to become or to be transcendent, right? That being is fundamental, but the transcendence itself is not. Okay, so the transcendent being is not fundamental. The ability or and I'm just kind of like spitballing here, but that which has the potential for transcendence is universal and fundamental, but the transcendent being is not. And so, just because you're human doesn't make you Gandhi.
Right.
Just because you're human doesn't make you Christ or Buddha, right? You have to engage and enact that. Right? You can't just claim that. As fundamental. And so, I'm sure that's a contentious discussion in the spiritual realm, but in
our limited selves, like, we all have the capacity for good and we all have the capacity for evil, and obviously there's many you know, it's like a spectrum. It's not
Yeah.
like just good or just evil.
Right.
Most of us have a little bit of both, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or we do things that are less good than
Right.
other things. And so, yeah, we're not all Gandhi. We're not
Right.
all. And, like, even though there might be a spark of divinity within all of us, that doesn't mean that we're just automatically these good, loving creatures.
Right.
You know, we have to kind of learn to do that and learn to be that.
Right.
And
Yeah, and so that spark is fundamental to humanity,
mm-hmm.
but the articulation, you call it that, right, of transcendent being is not universal. Not everybody is, you know, this, you know, self-actualized, amazing human. There
Right.
are murderers and rapists and bad people. You know, there are
Right.
people who have that spark of divinity, and they constantly trash it. You know, with poor ethical choices, poor moral decisions, and kind of just harmful, deceitful, soul-corroding ways of being in the world, and they
Right.
do bad things to other people.
yeah.
You know what I mean? They're not everybody is right. So when you get into that, so we've kind of laid that out
Mm-hmm.
pretty solidly, I think. But now, if that's the case,
Mm-hmm.
then it's true also for ideas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are ideas that are fundamental, and there are ideas that are more transcendent.
Mm-hmm.
And we're kind of always working in ways to find the right balance of the transcendent and the fundamental, so that we can live together in a cohesive unity, right? And the better we are at that, the more the broader the broader of a society that we can kind of maintain, you know, as a stable society. So, well, okay, I guess that's enough of that. I just kind of went on a
It's okay.
tear there for a little while.
That's all right. Should we go to a new topic? Or back to what we were talking
What
about
was the
before?
other thing I was thinking about? I was thinking about something. Integral theory. Oh yeah, the pre-post fallacy and stuff. So we kind of talked about that. We kind of touched on it a little bit.
We go all over the place sometimes.
Yeah, we've been wandering quite a bit today. But so I think it's important to just kind of, I know that there's, I said that, you know, I think that these concerns on the right are justified but maybe overblown. You know, one of the things that Jonathan Haidt talks about in this conversation with Joe Rogan is that even within the SJW culture, the call out culture, and the this kind of radical, leftist identity politics, right wing identity politics is a totally different thing. But I mean, it's just horribly demonized by. I mean, and I don't want to use the word horribly. It's justifiably and overwhelmingly demonized by everyone, as it should be.
Right.
But I think the same thing should basically be true about identity politics on the left.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's that we should give up the kind of hard-won freedom of and kind of primacy of the individual and individual sovereignty in the face of collective oppression. I don't think that's something that we should give up.
Yeah.
I think that's something that needs to remain foundational for us to move forward. You know, in that constant negotiation of the foundational and the transcendent, we're constantly splitting off in all these different directions. The progressives, and this is what they're supposed to do. This is good. This is good. Split off in all these different directions and find new ways of being, so that we can incorporate them and create new layers, deeper, broader consensus that we can, context that we can all exist within. that's what they're, you know, that's what they're good at, and you know, more power to them for that. But in our building of a new consensus, the idea that we should kind of forego the sovereignty of the individual in favor of group identities, you know, along basically arbitrary lines. I mean, this is a weird thing. Is like, I agree with the left, the left kind of postmodern interpretation of race. It's like, for example, why do we call people in America, in the United States, we call people black if they're any amount African, you know, descendant, right?
Right.
But in like South Africa, you would be called white if you're not any, and you know what I mean.
If you were
it's like
lighter than
right. So these ideas
of
of race are kind of very weird. It's like, what percentage do you become that race? It's like it's there's nothing really objective about our categories of race, right? We're human, and there are people with varying degrees of pigment, you know, who have, you know, varying amounts of ancestry from, you know, various places on the planet. But like, there's no hard and fast category, you know, way to categorize things that are that there's generalizations, right? And obviously, you know, generalizations are useful in some contexts and they make sense. But like, I agree with their assessment of race, you know, in that it doesn't really exist.
Right.
But then they go on to, you know, to kind of say that if you're, you know, one race or another, then you have these, you know, these particular ways of being in the world that need to be, you know, privileged in some way.
Right. Yeah. I don't agree with their assessment that, like, you know, if you're other than white, then you're allowed, or, you know, you can make fun of white people, you can denigrate white people, but that's not called racism in their mind. That's not racism. In their mind, racism is only prejudice plus power.
Right.
And I disagree. You know, you can be racist. Anyone can be racist of anyone else. It doesn't matter who you are.
Well, and this is weird too, because one of the problems with the kind of postmodern narrative framing and reframing and constantly like recontextualizing is that it deprives us of a standard of of shared meaning. It's like when you say racist, 90% of the people in the world, right, think, oh, you mean someone who doesn't like someone because of the color of their skin, right? But that's not the conversation that they're having. So if we can't agree on what terms mean, and we have to have this whole discussion about, well, when you say racist, do you mean this or that? It makes things really complicated. Yeah. And so I think there's a real problem with and that's another one of those things, you know, that you know, kind of Mark Ledwidge said, you know, that people aren't being Machiavellian about it. They actually see, you know, that they think there actually is harm. It's like, yes, okay, I can see that. But there's something disingenuous about stealing the term and like redefining something so that you know, so that now suddenly we're talking about different things. You know,
right.
If you want to say that, you know, the ways that we talk about people, you know, have measurable effects in employment, right? That's something, right? And we can talk about that.
Sure.
If you just want to say that it's harmful, well, that's not measurable, one.
Right. It's not helpful.
It's not
to say that and
it also kind of it's trying to steal the definition, you know, of, it's like saying that there are population levels of disparity in terms of employment, or, you know, when you these famous studies where people look at resumes and they see, you know, a name that's like stereotypically African American, right? And then you know, or female, and they see these, you get results where there's a disparity in the acceptance of those proposals or those resumes.
Yeah.
Or the, you know, how they rank them in terms of, you know, desirability for employment.
Yeah.
You know, that's not the same thing as punching someone in the face, right? So when you talk about harming someone, right?
There's different levels. I mean, there's different levels of prejudice.
Well, but there's a distinction between the individual physical being, right? And these kind of conceptual categories that we put people in. And one of the big problems with the postmodern project is that we're kind of blowing out the individual in so many different ways. It's like, I'm talking about harming someone, right? There's these weird, it's like you can't harm a community, really. What are you talking about when you say harm a community? How do you harm a community?
Right.
Right? This is something that's important, and we got to talk about, I think, more frequently, is that where the rubber meets the road, right? Like in the Holocaust, is when a person of Jewish heritage is killed, you know, because of a system that despises them.
Right.
That's harm, right? But harm isn't enacted on a community; it's actually embodied in an individual, and we've got to figure out how to like make these distinctions and still be able to talk about them, right? Like the idea that a community is harmed is so there's all this there's a lot of details kind of like hidden in that, you know, like I was saying before, like there's so much glossed over in that idea. Oh, it harms this community. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
Harm is, you know, should be reserved for
like certain
harms.
Yeah.
Harms.
And I mean, like what do they mean? Like you're hurting their feelings? Is that
right? What qualifies as a harm?
Yeah.
You know, I really think that there's, you know, I have this idea that like a government isn't compassionate, right? Individual human beings can be compassionate, and they can combine to make a system that, you know, works better for more people, and I think that's all true. But the idea that we can have a compassionate system, right, is kind of a misnomer.
Yeah.
Right? Because systems aren't compassionate.
Right.
Compassion is an individual thing.
Right.
It exists in the individual.
There might be
being.
Individual compassionate people in politics, but as a whole, it can't be.
Right.
You know?
The law has, you know, the law is written words. Right. There's no such thing as you know, it's like a computer isn't compassionate. You can do compassionate things with a computer, maybe.
Right.
Right. But you can't set up a compassionate computer.
Right.
You can't set up a compassionate network of computers. You can't, you know, these things aren't, compassion lives in the individual human soul. That's where the rubber meets the road, you know? And the same thing is true of harm, I think. You know, harm affects an individual human being, right? And you can say that the rest of these things are kind of conceptual, and they're conceptual containers that we abstract you know, like abstractions, collectives of, you know, groups. They're abstractions. It's not real. So to say that, okay, for example, there's, you know, this argument that respectability politics harms the African American community.
Respectability politics?
Yeah, this idea that, well, you know, if you want to protest police violence, there's a right way to do it. Shouldn't be rioting in the streets, right? It's like you should be respectable, right? And this is kind of, there's some you know, pre-post fallacies going on in there too. But like, you say it harms the African American community. It's like, well, what about people like Larry Elder? Larry Elder is a black man who's, I mean, he believes that, you know, that narratives about how respectability politics harm the African American community are harming the African American community. Mm-hmm. He's saying they shouldn't be respectable. Why? Mm-hmm. Right? So like, you hear a black man like Larry Elder. Well, is he part of the black community? Is he part of the African American community? So like, who is it harming? What are we talking about?
Right.
Right? It's, you know, how do we have at the same time this kind of idea that race isn't real, mm-hmm. right? But we're harming a race.
Right, right.
You know, so they're right about the fact that the race isn't real. They're wrong about the fact that we're harming a race. You know what I mean? Like, I think that that's what it boils down to in a way, right? Like, there's individuals who have problems, and we cannot lose the distinction of the individual as the bedrock, the individual human right as the bedrock of mm-hmm. a global society. Like, in order to have global peace, mm-hmm. we have to respect the individuals, not the groups.
Yeah. I mean, we're all so different, you know? If I was an African American, like, I think I would be actually a little pissed that they're just like lumping you in with the group. Like, they're just acting as if you're like everybody else within your race. And it's like, no, we're all different, you know? We all come from different economic backgrounds. We all, mm-hmm. you know, have different religion potentially, you know? Mm-hmm. We all have different beliefs about what's right and what's wrong, and, you know, what our likes and dislikes are, and our political ideology. Like, we're all so different within one race, you know what I mean? Like, and then not to mention amongst different races, but to just lump you in with, you know, the people that look like you, I'm sorry, but it's completely...
It's very strange, and I think that, well, some of the stuff that is going on with, like, when Kanye West, you know, came out and wore a MAGA hat, you know, Make America Great Again hat, you know, there's this kind of, I think we're seeing some of this kind of like, kind of, I don't know, individualization of, and maybe in the political realm we'll continue to see more of it. This kind of breaking up of, kind of racialized voting blocks. I'm hopeful, and actually that we'll see a lot more of that, because I think by and large in America as a culture we're moving more towards kind of that orange meme center, and that as we move more and more, as we progress, and I think we're making progress. I think as we make more and more progress, we'll see more and more people who break down, you know, whose politics break down along the lines of ideas rather than, you know, race and gender.
Yeah.
But I think it's so silly that we're, you know, seeing kind of it's not silly, it's dangerous that we're seeing a kind of an embracive kind of breaking down the and so it's so hard, because there's the pre-trans or the pre-post fallacy about, like, you know, collectivism and kind of identity politics on the right versus on the left. Mm-hmm. It's a different kind of identity politics on the left.
Yeah.
Right? It's totally different kind of identity politics on the left.
Yeah.
That's important to recognize, right? So there's it's not the same as going back, right, to move into kind of a recognition that different groups are treated differently in the world. It's not the same as going, you know, as saying that different groups should be treated differently in the world, mm-hmm. which is identity politics on the right. You know, my group is the right group, versus the leftist identity politics, which says all groups are, you know, equal. So they're not the same. One is definitely more advanced. One is more inclusive, one is morally better.
Mm-hmm.
I will just want to say that outright, you know what I mean? But the danger that we run the danger of kind of a certain kind of fractionating along gender lines because of this refocusing on group identity. So anyway, I think we're running out of time here. We're, an hour and 20 minutes in. Tamara's getting tired.
I need more coffee.
My throat's hurting, and I've been talking way too much because I'm a blabbermouth. But really appreciated hearing from Mark Ledwich. It was cool to see somebody respond to some of our stuff. Please leave us comments in the in the comments on YouTube, or send us your thoughts on Facebook or Twitter. You can find us on any of those platforms: Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Just Us Chatting. So
thanks for joining.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll look forward to talking to you again. Take care. Bye.